Hello and welcome back. In this video I'm going to show you how to assemble the DIY Packraft inflation bag, which is what I'm using to inflate the Packraft on screen right now. Start by finding the large rectangle of lightweight fabric in your kit. It's approximately 1 meter by 1.45 meters, or 39 by 57 inches. It might not be black like this one is. Lay the fabric out on your work surface with the shiny TPU side facing up, and then fold it in half by bringing the shorter edges towards you, as I'm doing here. The cut edges won't line up perfectly, so trim off some of the fabric from the lower half, so that when the edges facing you are aligned, you can't see any TPU that's facing up on the edge to your right. This will prevent the TPU from sticking to your iron when you weld that edge. Don't bother trying to get it to line up perfectly now. You can do that by trimming the edge after the two layers are welded together. Cut a rectangle of the heavy floor fabric from the scrap that's included with your kit. The exact size doesn't matter, but make it about 10 centimeters or 4 inches across. If you add a radius to the corners that's similar to the tip of your iron, that'll make it easier to iron. Mark the center of the square, and then use scissors to cut the fabric here in a star pattern with a diameter the same as the piece of rubber tubing that's included with your kit. Err on the side of making the cuts too short at first, and then test the fit, and lengthen them just until the tubing fits through the hole without deforming the rest of the rectangle. Set the tubing aside, and then mark the center of the edge of the bag that you previously trimmed. Then place something heat resistant between the two layers, or unfold the fabric, and place parchment paper beneath the fabric. Mark a spot roughly 10 centimeters or 4 inches in from the middle of this edge. Make sure that there's enough room between the hole and the edge of the fabric so that after you weld the rectangle of floor fabric in place, the ripstop fabric will extend past it at least a couple of centimeters, so the two sides of the folded ripstop can be welded together in the next step. Cut a hole there that the tubing can easily fit through. If you care to, I'm sure you can do a better job of making the hole look good than I did here. Slide the floor fabric rectangle under the ripstop fabric, but on top of the parchment paper, and align the two holes. Then use your iron to weld the two together. If you haven't welded the ultralight ripstop fabric before, cut a thin strip off the far end of the bag to practice with first. That's the edge that's to your left, if you laid everything out the way I did. If the inflation bag is the first part of your kit that you're making, be sure to watch the heat sealing video before you start welding. You'll see in a moment that I melted some of the TPU on the ripstop fabric that extends past the edges of the floor fabric square. This is just an inflation bag, and I don't really care how it looks, so I wasn't concerned about that. But if you want yours to look better than mine, try not to let the iron overhang the thicker fabric when you're welding them together. You can feel the edges with your fingertips, as I'm doing here, or you can mark them out with masking tape or chalk or something removable like that. When you're finished, flip the fabric over to check the weld. If there are spots along the edge where a fingernail fits in, go back and weld those areas again. Now let's weld the edges of the bag together. Align the sides that are facing you, and then use your iron to weld them together. I made my weld about half the width of my iron, which is plenty for a seam like this. You might have noticed that I didn't place parchment paper under this edge, and that's because I don't really care if a bit of melted TPU sticks to my table. But if you want to avoid that, place your parchment paper beneath the lower layer of fabric. The lengths of the edges won't match perfectly, but that doesn't matter. You can trim them later if you want to. Next, weld together the edges that are nearest the floor fabric rectangle. Start ironing this seam at the end of your previous weld. If you begin at the folded end, you might end up with a little bit of extra fabric on one side or the other. But if you start at the weld and work towards the fold, you can work out any misalignment by simply moving the fold. When that's done, you can clean up the welded edges by trimming off a bit of fabric. I didn't bother to do that because I'm going to make this inflation bag with the TPU on the outside, so the edges of the welded seams will end up on the inside of the bag. You can make yours with the TPU on either the inside or the outside. It doesn't really matter. But with the TPU on the outside, the bag is less likely to absorb water if it gets wet. Now the bag itself is finished, and all that's left to do is attach the tube. The soft rubber tube is simply going to friction fit into the threaded part of the Boston valve, and it's easier to insert it if you taper the end a little bit. You may as well do that before it's attached to the bag. Also roughen up the other end of the tube with a knife or sandpaper so that your glue will stick to it better. The seam grip that I used doesn't stick super well to the tubing, so if you have a different suggestion, please leave a comment below. Double check the fit of the tubing in the hole, and then add a bead of glue around its end before inserting it into the hole. You can't really see it in this shot, but I've placed a scrap of wood inside the bag under the hole so that if any glue runs down off the end of the tube, it won't stick to the other side of the bag. Allow the glue to cure. If you want to reinforce this glue joint, turn the bag inside out and wrap some thread tightly around it, and then apply another layer of glue. I don't find it necessary to add handles to my inflation bags, but if you want to, you can make some from a plastic clothes hanger. Just cut out the straight sections and fold the rim of the bag over them, and weld the bag fabric to itself so they're trapped in the folds. To learn how to use your inflation bag, watch the video that's linked on the screen now. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching.